just connected. Yeah.
Let's go. Right. Kia ora mai tātou, ko te mihi tuatahi ki te mana whenua kei konei, te tau iho te waka, nā iwi toko waru, tēnei te mihi ki a koutou. Kia koutou marungia tēnei webinar, me kia koutou kei konei ki Cawthron, tēnei te mihi mahana ki a koutou katoa, e haramai ki te rongo ki a maua, e kōrero e pāna nā kirihau ki roto I te moana. Ko wai tēnei, he uri tēnei no Ngāti Tūwhare toa, Ngāti Kahungunu ki Wairoa, Te Ata Haunui a Papa Ārangi, Ngai Tūhoe, rawa ko rongo mai wahine. Ko Heni Unwin tuku ingoa. Ki tōku taha, ko Vennell, he uri ia no Tāmaki Makaurau. He kaiputai a māua ki Cawthron Institute. No e tēnā koutou katoa, ka huri au ki te reo tuaroa I nā nei. Hi everybody, my name is Heni Unwin, and the genius coming on after me will be Vennell. And we're here today to talk to you about tracking plastics in our marine environment. I will start with how the project came about and a bit about it, and then Ross will get into the nitty-gritty details of it. And then we'll do a live demonstration, and then Ross will finish with further applications of how this website can be used. Just a disclaimer before we start, no oceans were harmed in the making of this website, just so you know. All right, so we'll go into, without further ado, we'll go into the title of our project. It is Interactive Tools for Enabling Participation and Knowledge Exchange, Project 5.14, Participatory Tools. It is a project at the boundary of science and society to develop and implement tools for facilitating participation in decision-making and communicating science. Now, within these cleverly written words, what we're actually trying to do is to connect. We're trying to connect people to science, we're trying to connect people to the environment, connect region to region, connect changes to consequences, and it's most importantly about connecting the science we know and discover with the people. And when we're doing that, we enable them to not only be active participants, but get involved, and then we can share knowledge at the same time. So this project really is about communicating connectivity. So how do we communicate connectivity? We use tools that either inform or educate and are hopefully easy to use. Hello, goodbye. And so the tools that we wanted to create, or we had to then decide what tools we needed to create. And since we've both been in the marine space, we thought, you know, the ocean is the easiest tool we can try and mimic or create from that. So we looked at currents and current systems around New Zealand. And the reason we chose this is because a lot of people know about currents, but the full scale of where everything goes is actually really hard to comprehend and really hard to know where it goes. But then we had to think about how could we then really convey these currents and get people interested and get people to really connect with what we're trying to show them. And that's where plastic came into the forefront. So plastic, I don't know if you guys know this, like it's not been in the news or anything or broadcast quite widely, but plastic isn't really great for the environment. So you know, plastic isn't great for the environment. It has reached, it's from the Arctic to the Antarctic, it's all the way through the water column. It's even been found in the deepest parts in the Mariana Trench, which is the deepest part of the ocean. So it's not that great. About 8 million tonnes a year gets into the ocean. That's about 1 garbage truck per minute, which is quite a lot. So also with it not looking that beautiful, it is also very detrimental to species. There are over 693 species recorded that have encountered plastic, and over 260 species that have either been entangled, eaten plastic, or have died by plastic. But this is just only currently, we're not actually too sure of the full scale. For New Zealand in particular, we hold 50% of the world's marine mammals. They either live here or they travel through here. And also we are the seabird capital of the world. So there are 380 species of seabirds. 95 of them live in New Zealand. 9 migrate here and 35 are endemic to New Zealand. And currently on our beaches, 78% of all the trash that is picked up is contributed to plastic. So it is a massive issue, and I'm just going to tell you a story about how important it is to know where our plastic is going and how far it can reach, and why we should be looking into where this is going. So this right here is Midway Atoll. It is midway between Asia and the Americas. And on this island, there's a lot of albatross. And unfortunately, one of these albatross died from eating too much plastic. But one of these pieces of plastic had a barcode on it. And they traced this barcode back to a World War II plane that got shot off the coast of Japan. And they then used a computer simulation to find out where this plastic had traveled and how far it had traveled. So what they found was that it had circled off the coast of Japan for about a decade before traveling all the way over here, where it circled for the next 50 years before getting eaten by this albatross and then killing it. So this is sort of the importance of why we need to know where our plastic is going, and looking at what effect it really does have. So I'm now going to hand you over to Ross, who's going to talk more about what we're doing. Okay.
Well, thanks, Heni. Yeah, so I'm sort of just talk a little bit about what we're doing and why we're doing it, and he'll come back with a demonstration. And then, so I mean, what we were trying to do.
Yeah.
I'm dyslexic, forward and backwards are a bit difficult. Whatever. So what we want to really try and communicate about connectivity, and plastics is a good way of communicating about this. And the sort of inspiration for our project was this website that I found, which was called Plastic Adrift, where basically it sort of allows you to drop a plastic duck in the middle of somewhere, and it's sort of over time it sort of gives you a simulation of where things have gone. So as you can see, it's over many years that, as Heni says, most of that stuff ends up in the Eastern Pacific, in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which there's an oceanographer I know is there, because that's actually effectively the sinkhole of the ocean. It's created by a combination of the winds interacting with the Earth's rotation on a spherical Earth. Okay, that's the detail, but basically there's a little sinkhole there created by the winds and the Earth's rotation, and the water goes down, and of course the plastic floats and accumulates at that spot. So so people sort of our idea this really big scale, but thinking about how can we do that on a New Zealand scale, because that's a bit out there. How do we connect that to something more local? So first of all, how do we do that in New Zealand? And on top of that, this is interesting, that these are only just heat maps, actually, if you think about it, of where the plastic is. It's actually not showing individual bits and pieces. So we want to go that next level. Can we do it in New Zealand that actually show where individual pieces of plastic might go? So here's sort of an output of what that might look like, sort of on a prototype when we're looking at it. So just clear, so these are little bits of virtual plastic which have been released from these little black circles in various places. They're actually not, there's not, as you can see over on here, there's not just, we released a puff of them at the same time. So, because as things go on, random motion moves things apart. So there's little puffs going out every so often. And you can see, if you look carefully, sort of down here, you can see where the estuary is literally breathing out and then breathing in again. And so it's much more engaging than that picture we had in the first place. It was just this heat map being developed over time. And so, and there are lots of other details you can bring in there, such as, if you look here, there's got these green ones here, where these are ones that have been left by the tide, stranded by the tide, as the tide goes out. And the tide comes in, as you see with the blue ones. Oh, bad timing, wait for it to come back again. And the new one, you can see they may get picked up if the tide's high enough and then moved on again and then dropped again. So it's a lot more engaging than thinking about where's my plastic going. So we wanted to sort of combine those two things, get really an interactive animation. And you can see, and it also communicates about really, for me, what I like is that it really communicates about how our estuaries literally breathe. They breathe in and out of the ocean. And you can see that they suck in the water, they breathe out, they create these large scale structures and vortices and whatever. And the other technical detail is these red lines are where the particles fall off the end of our model world. Okay, so that's the limit of our model world. So that's what we're trying to do. How do we get that into the picture? So it's more interesting than that. So really the whole story is about how do we're trying to communicate people where does stuff go. So it's about virtual plastic and coastal connectivity. So sort of what we mean by coastal connectivity is like, here's sort of some other tracks of virtual ones sort of dropped in various places around the coastline and around Cook Strait. So that these blue lines sort of show ones that have come from the South Island, the yellow ones are ones from the North Island. And you can see that there's actually a story of connection even in these pictures, like particles dropped around Farewell Spit and Golden Bay tend to go onto the Wairarapa coast, and a few of them actually sneak round into the, well, not the Kapiti coast, wrong side, dyslexic again, and then sneaks out onto the Wairarapa coast. So that, but if you look, there's actually almost no, it's very unlikely something's going to go from Golden Bay to Taranaki. So there's the story about coastal connectivity is complicated. Not everywhere is connected very easily. And so conversely, stuff that might drop in the water at Taranaki doesn't necessarily get to the South Island very easy. It just charges along the coast. It's more likely to end up on the Wairarapa coast than the South Island. So it's those sort of connections and disconnections which are actually quite interesting to communicate about. So that's partly what the tool's about, just to give people those ideas. So I have to do a bit of science on the way. And so in terms of, we try and quantify some of those ideas in terms of connectivity matrices. I don't have time to explain this all in detail, but I'll just sort of walk you through a couple of features in it. So this is really a summary of what's gone here. And here we've released 1 million particles, not just 100, to try and calculate some statistics about where things go. And to be precise, 974,806, whatever, 1 million. And that gives a lot of good statistics of what's going on. So basically, this on the left is a number which indicates where things were dropped. On the bottom is a number that indicates where things were arrived at. Okay, so it's a from to, basically. The colours along the axis don't mean much because they're particles, they're bits that have been dropped in one place and have ended up residing in that one place. The interesting story is about these colours off here, like this one here. This one where stuff which might have originated at around the Farewell Spit, Golden Bay, there's actually a 30–40% chance it'll end up on the lower Kapiti coast. And that's what that blob tells you. And this lighter colours here, there's actually a smaller chance it'll go around through Cook Strait and end up on the Wairarapa coast. So these sort of pictures give you a sense of a colour representation of where things might go. And of course, going where things go is only half the story. How long do they take? Because if you're for a piece of plastic, unfortunately, they may last for decades. But if you're a larvae and you can only live for 3 or 4 days, if you don't land somewhere in 3 or 4 days, you're probably not going to make it. So how long it takes is also part of the question. So again, the material that might have left the Nelson Golden Bay, the Golden Bay Farewell Spit area takes around for 10 to 15 days to hit the Kapiti coast. So it's not happening instantaneously. It's wandering all over the place, and eventually 10 to 15 days it has a 30% chance of ending up on the Kapiti coast. And in a smaller number of them, in 20 to 25 days, will end up around the Wairarapa coast. So again, this is just these matrices are just ways of communicating to a scientist about connectivity. They don't mean a lot to most people. We have to really work with them for a while to get a sense of how useful they can be. So we're trying to quantify this. So that sort of give you a bit of a technical context to what we're doing. So here's another example of some stuff dropped in Cook Strait, lots of colourful tracks. And this is just 10 days worth. Particularly in Cook Strait, you can see things dropped in Cook Strait go back and forth with the tides, but there is a general movement in this particular set down towards the south. Okay. Stuff dropped up here. You see there's tiny little tidal motions back and forth, but generally it's just drifting this way. And the ones around Farewell Spit, well, some of them nipped around the back, came back again. So there's lots of detail going on. So the technical context of the tool that we've developed is sort of built on top of hydrodynamic computer models of the ocean. So NIWA, MetOcean, they just churn these things out in an amazing way, create these large data sets of computer model currents over space and time. Okay, so what we've particularly worked on is the middle ground, which is what we call the particle tracking engine. It's like it takes in this case, a couple of gigs file of output from the hydrodynamic model, and then calculates it. It says if you drop a particle right here, sorry, I'm looking at the screen. If you drop a particle somewhere like here, it then goes ahead and does the calculation. Where do I go next time? And the next time, and the next time, and so on for as long as you want to do that. So we call it technically a particle tracking engine. Okay, but there's many ways of referring to it. So a lot of the work we've done has actually gone into making this, and particularly a very fast one of those. And ultimately, for this particular tool, that information gets transmitted to the front, to the web browser. It's displayed for the user, and they see the animations all going on. So there's sort of two parts to it. We sort of start with hydrodynamic model. We use this particle tracker. We build a particle tracker on top of that does the calculations. It sends those calculated track coordinates to the web browser, and the web browser displays them and animates them, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so the issue here is that there are a couple of different types of hydrodynamic model grids. This is a triangular or unstructured computer model grid. So this one happens to be for Auckland. And you can see that there's made up basically of triangles. We basically break the world up into triangles and solve Newton's law in each of those triangles. In this case, it's about 100,000. So there's very large triangles out here, but they're very small ones. It might be only 100 meters or so in size up near the coastline. So this unstructured grid allows you to put big triangles where you don't really care and things are changing very slowly, but where you want the detail, up into the shore, it puts lots of detail. Okay, that's in contrast to the other type, which is called a regular grid, which is basically you break the world up into evenly spaced this way and this way, makes a nice regular lattice, if you like. And but you can imagine if I had to break this area up into a regular lattice of 100 meter intervals, the number of cells and little cells I get would be horrendous. It's just computationally not feasible to do that. So in coastal domains, as opposed to the deep ocean, we tend to use these unstructured grids because they allow us to, with a relatively small number of these cells, 100,000 rather than millions, to construct a model. So it's basically enables you to put the resolution where it counts. So what we need to is develop make sure we have a particle tracking engine that calculates these tracks based on one of these unstructured grids fast. And the reason using unstructured grids is they're much faster to run for the hydrodynamic model. So the people like Ocean who will build a hydrodynamic model and then run it, and when I run it, still, even on these unstructured grid, they'll run it, it'll take the time they hit go to, it can be days to weeks. So it's fast, but it's not that fast. It's just got to be quite patient. So they'll go off and do other work in between, but they're continually starting a model, running, going off and doing other stuff, waiting for it to happen, come back. So the advantage is if we had to do this with unstructured grid, it wouldn't take weeks, it would take years, which is not even I have the patience for that. So that's the advantage of using unstructured grids and the hydrodynamic modeling. But the downside of that, when you come to use the particle tracking, trying to calculate the tracks going using the output from the hydrodynamic model, it's much, much, much slower. Okay, and that's what we're really focused on. How do we make that part much faster? And that particularly is slower because you've broken the world up into lots of little triangles. And so if I dropped a virtual little particle maybe in this triangle here, I then have to calculate what's the current at that location. I do that by interpolation from the information in the computer model just in the little triangle that's containing it. Okay, but then how do I find that triangle in an unstructured grid? That's what takes a lot of time. Okay, and we've made some techniques which speed up that. Some of the things we've done is speeded up that process. So finding where you are in the grid is one of the computationally expensive steps. So that we're trying to make this thing run really fast in unstructured grids, but why the heck do we want to? I mean, it's all, I'm a geek, I like making things fast, but there are a lot of good reasons. Firstly, for this online tool, we want to be able to calculate these tracks fast enough that the user doesn't get bored waiting for them to be displayed. And so when we started this tool, that will probably take in 60 seconds. And nobody's going to wait in for 60 seconds for a picture up here. So we've got that down to 2 to 7. Okay, that's part of the reason. So part of the reason to get these to deal with impatient users online. But the other one is, which is probably more interesting for us as scientists, is that doing it fast allows us to model, instead of modeling thousands, we model millions. Okay, and they just get better statistics about the particles and where they go. Because you can imagine that if I drop particles because it matters where and when I drop these particles. If I drop some in Auckland Harbour here on the flood tide, they're going to very different locations than I drop them on the ebb tide, or anywhere in between. So you can see having millions of particles allows us to explore more combinations of where and when we drop them. And of course, when we drop them, we don't just drop one, we have to drop a little cluster, because if you think of it, in normal biology, you call that replicates, you know what I mean? So you want to say you drop a whole lot at the same time and place and see where they go. You know what I mean? So you see that the numbers of combinations add up really quickly. And then on top of that, we'll say, actually, let's say that one's a particle that might only live for 2 days, and that one lives for 3 days, or that larvae lives for 2 days, that one lives for 4 days. You've got all these variations to explore. So being able to simulate millions quickly has enabled us to draw a lot more combinations of things. And so with ocean tracking, it's 100 times faster than the tool we started with. And just for the geeks in the room, it's 100 times faster on a single computer core. Okay, so here's an example of where we've been using it, which is this model grid for Cook Strait and Marlborough Sound. It's actually one for Ben Knight's PhD, which Ben Knight gave the last seminar. He's going to be using it. He and I are going to be using it to look at connectivity within the Marlborough Sounds. And in this case, the model grid starts at about a 4 kilometre grid resolution out in the deeper parts, down to 40 metres along the shore. So it's about 150,000 little intersections, about 300,000 little triangles. So, you know, it's a reasonable size, but it's fully three-dimensional. So that not only the particle, in this work we're moving horizontally, they're actually also moving vertically. Okay, and then his project is around, can we identify the naturally sort of like fire break zones between parts of the sounds that might inhibit the movement of invasive species or diseases between different parts of the sound? Can we try and identify those, and maybe that will help us design in the future where we put aquaculture within the sounds. Okay, in terms of speed, just because this is my last slide before I hand back to Heni for the actual fun part, is if you think about the tool we had available at the beginning, say in this sort of time, we'll call it, say in an hour, might be able to get through and calculate the tracks for about 10,000 particles, okay? Oh, that's interesting, okay. But then what we're saying now is that for that same hour, we come over to what we've developed, and we're doing 1 million. Okay, so we've scaled from 10,000 an hour to 1 million. And basically it's actually, as I said earlier, we wanted to run it fast online for people, for the user's attention span. It's also about the scientist's attention span. Fortunately, that's longer than 2 to 7 seconds, but our attention span is basically overnight. If we can get things working at the end of the day, run it overnight, come back in the morning and start work, so all the calculations are done overnight and I don't have to wait for them, that's our sort of our sweet spot, okay? So our attention span is overnight. So this enables us to do lots and lots overnight. It does create a headache in the morning because you've got the data to deal with, but we have ways of dealing with that. But that's sort of our attention span. So the advantage of this tool is that we now can run, you know, so if we instead of running 10,000 an hour, maybe 100,000 overnight in the old tool, we're now doing 1 million in an hour or 10 million overnight, you know, with a new tool. And that's all on one core for the geeks. It's actually, if you had 10 computer cores, it's 10 times more. So you could be doing 100 million overnight. Okay, and again, this just allows you to explore lots of combinations of various behaviors and movements and whatever. Okay, so that's the techie stuff about it. So we're able to come back to more ground truth. Actually, how are we going to use it? So I'll hand back to Heni.
Thanks, Ross. Okay, so now we're going to do a live demonstration of the actual website, and it's totally going to work. And there's going to be no sort of technical difficulties at all. All right, so this is our splash page. So what we can do with our website is you can drop virtual plastic into these formats, and it will show you where it goes and where it lands. So we have Cook Strait, Tauranga Moana, Nelson, and the Hauraki Gulf. You press get started, or you can click on a map. So we'll just go to the Cook Strait, and you can just start clicking, and it will load. And you can click as many times as you want. I'll just do a couple of spots right now, just to show you the full things. The black is where you've dropped 50 plastics. The green here is moving plastic. Oh, I'll just move this to the side because that's showing you another key. And then the red is where it's landed. So obviously that one's landed quite quickly. Up here we have a tide gauge that is taken from the green Wellington here. And then we also have day and night and how fast it's going, or how many days it has moved around. We sort of had a lot of battles with how many plastics we could put and how fast it would run. So we've only limited it to sort of 30 days, and also limited it to 100 plastic particles, just to ensure that it would keep running those 2 to 7 seconds, not those full-on minutes. But also alongside this, for the data that we've used, we don't use the today's data, the current models, current winds and currents data. We've used data from 2012, I think, in a random month of June. This is just so it's not a predictive model, so people don't go out and drop a piece of plastic in the ocean and be like, I know where it will go, and then follow it around. So after the simulation is finished, it will either finish when all the plastic has landed or when the days have run up. For the Cook Strait, it is 30 days. Tracks will show and say where each individual plastic has gone. And then what you can do is, because there's statistics, and this is the average overall, it gives you the average distance traveled and the average speed. But you can also go individually into each plastic as well. So this one here has traveled 295 kilometres at 40 kilometres an hour, and it's different for all of them. So you can also change the map just down here as well. We'll go to Tauranga Moana next, just because it's one of my faves. And in here in the settings, this is where you can change how many plastics you drop. So I'll just go randomly 15. We also have a drip feed, which just release plastics not in one bunch, but just one at a time. And you can change the speed, but you also have autoplay. So this is where you can drop as many virtual plastic spots as you want and release them all at the same time. So we'll just do a couple of spots again. Just randomly add one in here. And then you just press play to get it going. All right, so here on the mud flats, as Ross was saying before, that, you know, plastic can land on the sediment when it is low tide and then can get picked up again when it is high tide. And so these are what the yellow markers mean over here. And it's moving very slow, but that's okay because it's still working. Right, just wait for all of it to land. Oh. Just needs some like background music, doesn't it? Yeah. Maybe we could speed it up. Oh no, it's deciding to go all over the place. That's all right. That's what it normally does. So Tauranga is actually a shorter amount of time just because it is actually quite a large data set, whereas Auckland, Tauraki Gulf and Tauranga, no not Tauranga, Nelson, Tasman Bays are all 30 days. All right, it's all finished now. So within here, you can sort of notice that some of these particles have plastics, virtual plastics, have travelled quite some distance, or little distance because I'm moving back and forth, and ones over here have definitely travelled a very long distance away because they went out all over the moana. All right, and so you can just either press the reset button here or and start again if you want to. Cool. What other features we have on our website is there's a guide, and this is a how-to model, how-to video that we put up as well. We also have plastic oceans. This tells you about plastic in our ocean, and it gives you a bit more detailed information about sort of why it is bad to have plastic in our ocean and the effects that it does have. We have Moana, which is Māori's connection with the ocean, and it comes with some stories and some whakatauki as well. The model is how the model works, and it was the simplest way I could explain it, so forgive me. It was quite hard to explain what Ross said into simple terms. And next steps is websites which you can follow to see what you can do next, because it's all well and good knowing where your plastic is going, but what can you then do? So these websites have different stuff of how you can either minimize your waste or recycle your waste or help remove it, or look at education research programs focused on ocean plastic pollution. And lastly, we have our credits. These are just to all the people we thank. And then there's a special thank you down here to all the schools that I worked with, which leads me back to, if I just get out of here, do the thing. Do that thing. Oh, it's done a weird thing. Here we go. Yeah, so we see this as a very educational tool. I went out and did a lot of work with schools and with a lot of teachers to ensure that what we were making was useful for them. And, you know, the students really picked up on it. And I remember one kid saying that he like, oh my God, I destroyed Auckland. It was amazing. And it was just, he had dropped quite a lot of plastic. It looked like a bomb site. But so that was all good and stuff. But with the teachers, I also asked them to create a lesson plan around this and see what they thought about it, and every time that they wrote a lesson plan, they're either writing a whole module or they're writing a term's worth of work, because this model isn't about the be-all and end-all, but it is an introduction to what you can talk about with plastic, and with not only with plastic, but with animals, with the detriment of human effects, with currents in the ocean. It can even go into statistics and computer modeling. So there's just many different levels that you can use this in within your education system. So yeah, worked very, very hard with those schools, and sort of they also helped with how we shaped and how we presented the website itself. So Ross is now going to talk about the future applications, further applications.
Thanks, Heni. Yeah, the school stuff was really interesting, because I think one of them suggested we call it, we were agonising what to call this thing. Okay, and there was, where's my jandal gone?
Yeah.
I thought that was really good. Cool. Right, thank you. Right, so I just want to just very briefly about where we're going with where we're going. So this is sort of this last slide with a lot of text on it. But so just in terms of starting at the top, we're sort of, there's two roles of what we're calling this ocean tracker. There's an online engagement where you're trying to simulate, calculate the tracks of 100s fast, or
No, you go.
Okay. Okay. I thought you were telling me to move over.
Yeah. No.
Okay, and then the other role for us around this doing the offline stuff, doing millions in a finite time. Finite time's my attention span, which is overnight. Okay, so the current sort of science uses are around looking at the spread of invasive species of diseases from aquaculture farms. So these are important. This is where the large numbers actually count, because it might, if you've got an infection in one area, there might only a very small number of propagules or whatever cause the infection might move to another area, but if it gets there, the consequences are quite significant. So having lots of large numbers gives you a good idea of those low probabilities that are actually significant in that case because of the risk of infection. So they've been, again, sort of the work I took with Ben was sort of finding natural connectivity barriers within systems like the Marlborough Sounds, and in both these involve modelling larval behaviours. So how long do they live for? If they settle on the bottom, will they only hang around if the currents are below a certain amount of currents are weak enough for a certain amount of time? Those sorts of things. All of that individualised behaviour. The other thing we're using it for is for impact from salmon farms, the material that comes out of salmon farms. The previous tool we had, basically all it could do was let that stuff fall on the bottom and assume it stayed there forever, which of course it doesn't. Some of it will get eventually stirred up by waves and currents and move on. So we're able to expand what we're actually doing in that area, look at where things go over time, not just where they initially end up on the bottom. And so that involved developing sort of resuspending particles where they get stirred off the bottom if the currents near the bottom exceed a particular threshold. So the last one is the newest one is going to be looking at environmental DNA. Cawthron has a large project around, grants in the audience, so I've got to make sure I get that right. A biosecurity toolbox, or something like that. Okay, thanks, Brad. So a small part of that, is looking at environmental DNA. If you pick up the DNA, if you take a water sample and you pick up the DNA of an invasive species, that's great. You detected it's there. But there's a next step to that is you've met this water sample, but it might be 2 days water travel away from where the actual thing is. So we're trying to figure out how can we use this tool to actually go backwards in time this time, instead of going forward, to maybe identify where they're coming from. And having gone backwards in time, figure out where they might be coming from, go forward in time and calculate what concentration might they have when they arrived at the site you made the water sample. Because you're actually not measuring, you're measuring a concentration of this environmental DNA. So that's involved the next step, which is so we're going backwards in time, which is, where's my jandal gone? What's the opposite? Where's my jandal? You've gone to a beach and found a jandal, where's it come from? Okay, so it's the opposite question. Okay, so in terms of the online tool, so the future is really around, we're hoping to work with the Moana project and Met Ocean to actually create a model for the whole of New Zealand on at least a course level. So, because at the moment we're only doing these 4 areas, which is interesting, but it's not as nice as having it going all over New Zealand. So that's the next stage. We would like to make it go to reverse in time to answer that problem. If we find a bit of plastic at the beach, where might it have come from? Okay. And so just a few acknowledgements to the researcher. I have to mention Max, and he's in the room. Is that I've been talking about how to make this particle engine run really fast, but that's only, on the online tool, that's only half the story about speed. The other half is how do you display them on the screen and really fast so it doesn't get laggy and cluggy for the user. And so, because all those calculations have to be done on the user's browser, not on the fast computers that we have, on the slow computers that the user might have. And Max in the audience here has done a lot of hard work on that, so thanks, Max. And on top of that, we've had data provided from MetOcean's and OTEOT project, a MetOcean model for Tauranga, and NIWA for Cook Strait. And on top of that, there's the actual Max will do all the work around the actual map, dropping things on map and displaying all that. We had a commercial developer in town, Upshift, who did the sort of the framework of the web page. So, and of course, Heni did all of that hard work on the content and material behind the scenes that hopefully lots of people will look at. Great, thank you.
We've got some questions online already. So if I say it, but just in case the microphone isn't picking up. I was busy tweeting, so if it has been answered, just say so. Des Martin has said you might answer this, but does wind have any impact on the overall currents?
Absolutely. So these hydrodynamic models have wind built into them, so they've got tides. They're forced by tidal effects and wind effects as well, so that they're built in.
Anita Lewis has asked, what size and types of plastics?
Okay.
So we've said water bottle size and they're macroplastics. Just for microplastics, they're just a bit too small and they do a little bit more funny things. So we just stuck with macroplastics for now.
Because I mean, ideal would be to have a piece of plastic which broke up over time and you see where all the pieces go. But if you imagine if it broke up once a day, that's doubling the number of pieces. By the you've gone from 1 to but so we can't really do it. We'd love to do that, but so it's really about working on macro space that happens to be floating in this case. Yeah.
Okay. And Lizzie Wallace has asked, is this simulation running in or in the background of an ArcGIS web app?
Is this simulation being run in the background of an ArcGIS app? No, it's basically they're a bunch of these computation engines just got an API sitting in DigitalOcean essentially, and so there are actually 6 of them waiting there to deal with people. So we deal with 6 simultaneous requests without any charge. If you get to hundreds, we might struggle, but so it's not. It's just so maybe it's something where we're able to quick. We have the web page sends it. This is where I drop the plastic. That tells the engine that the engine spurs up, calculates the tracks, and then splits them back to the page.
Anyone here have any questions?
So how far have you got with the modelling around like barrier zones, or you mentioned that concept?
Well, that's really just
Repeat question.
How far we got with the work around creating barrier zones between aquaculture farms and naturally. Ben Knights, who's PhD, is in the room, could probably better answer that, but he's just starting out on his PhD, so not very far so far.
Lovely.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if you'd had any interest from kind of like ocean cleanup groups around targeting areas to collect plastics.
Yeah, we've had definitely a lot of interest because Sustainable Coastlines is also trying to move into this space as well. Maybe not this in particular, but also they're trying to find out where did it come from. And we also did some work with, what are they called, Auckland Dolphin Whale Safari, because they pick up microplastics as part of their tour, and they were very interested in to find out where it's been, and they wanted to utilise that on their tour as well. So there's definitely a lot of interest around, and I think it's just sort of about getting it out there and then finding out what more they want to know, and then seeing what we can do or where we can go from there. So yeah, lots of interest.
And then one more again from Anita Lewis. Says it's a very cool tool. Do you guys consider modelling especially larger than New Zealand?
So the question was, it's a great tool, but have you thought about modelling larger than New Zealand? Absolutely. Our aim for taking over the world is we've started with little areas, we've taken over New Zealand, and then there are many computer models out there for the whole globe, which we could also be using. So it's not a matter of the data's there, we just have to have the time to go and set it up and do it. But then people have to have a bit more patience, could have to run things for months rather than days. So sort of some trade-offs have to go on there. Well.
If you restricted the area to a much smaller space,
yeah.
how would that affect the model output?
What do you mean?
Would you get more accurate or faster results, or could you have more flexibility if you had a restricted study area?
So if you had so the question is, if you had a more restricted study area, would that change the results? Okay, so it really comes down to the underlying resolution of that hydrodynamic model. If you had a high resolution hydrodynamic model, we can do it. It turns out the engine we developed isn't actually very sensitive in terms of computation time to the resolution of that model. So if you double the resolution, it wouldn't make much difference to how long it takes to run. So you would get more detail, but there comes a point where how well are you actually representing the world in terms of the bathymetry and all those sorts of things as well. So yeah. So it's not really quite an answer to your question, but you certainly can model smaller areas.
Apologies if I put your name from the Aotearoa, who's asked, DC plastics having an impact on marine reserves?
Absolutely. Plastics can sort of get anywhere, as we've seen. It's now found in Arctic, Antarctica, Mariana Trench. So it will definitely have an impact on marine reserves. What that impact is something that definitely needs to be looked into and studied a bit more. But yeah, definitely yes.
Thank you very much.
Oh,